دماغ درست رہتا ہے تو وہ وضو کی وجہ سے اللہ تبارک و تعالیٰ جو وضو میں رہتا ہے اس کو مینٹل ہیلتھ کے پرابلم سے محفوظ فرما لیتا ہے۔ نماز کی پابندی کیا کریں، اس لیے کہ یہ مینٹل ہیلتھ کا جو ایشو آتا ہے اس کی وجہ جو ہے وہ صرف تنہائی اختیار کرنا، یعنی بندہ الون رہے، الگ رہتا ہے تو پھر اس کو یہ پرابلم ہوتی ہے۔ تو چونکہ جماعت ہم ایک ساتھ نماز پڑھتے ہیں تو جو جماعت کے ساتھ نماز پڑھتا ہے اس کو دوسرے نمازیوں کے ساتھ کمیونیکیشن کا موقع ملتا ہے اور اس کی وجہ سے اس کی جو ذہنی پریشانی ہے وہ دور ہو جاتی ہے۔ اس لیے رسول اللہ صلی اللہ علیہ وآلہ وسلم نے ارشاد فرمایا تم اپنی صفوں کو درست کیا کرو، تم ایک دوسرے کے ساتھ اپنا کندھا ملا لیا کرو، تم شولڈر ملاؤ گے میں تمہارے ہارٹ کو ملا دوں گا، تم اپنے کندھوں کو ایک دوسرے سے ملاؤ گے میں تمہارے دل کو ایک دوسرے سے ملا دوں گا، اور اس سے انشاءاللہ آپ امراض قلب سے بھی محفوظ رہیں گے۔ پرسکون نیند بھی ضروری ہے، اسی لیے رسول اللہ صلی اللہ علیہ وآلہ وسلم نے فرمایا عشاء کی نماز کے بعد سونے میں زیادہ تاخیر نہیں کرنی چاہیے، بندہ رات کو سو جائے جلدی اور صبح جلدی سویرے اٹھا کرے کہ پرسکون نیند ہوگی تو آپ کا ذہن درست ہوگا۔ اور پھر سکون کے بارے میں فرمایا گیا قرآن مجید میں اللہ تبارک و تعالیٰ نے ارشاد فرمایا اللہ الذی جعل لکم اللیل لتسکنوا فیہ والنہار مبصرا، کہ بے شک اللہ تبارک و تعالیٰ نے رات کو اس لیے بنائی ہے کہ تم اس میں پرسکون نیند حاصل کیا کرو۔ اور جو سورۃ النبا میں ہم پڑھتے ہیں واللیل لباسا وجعلنا النہار معاشا، یعنی اللہ تبارک و تعالیٰ نے دین کو معیشت کے لیے بنایا ہے، روزی کی تلاش ہمیں دن میں کرنی چاہیے اور رات میں ہمیں سونا چاہیے، لہذا کوشش فرمائیں رات کی جاب کو پرائرٹی نہ دیں، اگر ڈے شفٹ ہے اس کو آپ پرائرٹی دے کر آپ رات کو سکون کی نیند سلا کریں، اس لیے کہ اللہ تبارک و تعالیٰ نے اس کو آرام کرنے کے لیے پیدا بنایا ہے۔ ساتھ ہی ساتھ فرمایا گیا کہ قیلولہ ایک سنت ہے، قیلولہ کہتے ہیں دن میں کھانے کے بعد آفٹر لنچ تھوڑی دیر کے لیے آپ بستر پر لیٹ جائیں، سو لیں، جس سے آپ کو دلی سکون ملا کرتا ہے اور آپ کا برین بھی بالکل فریش رہتا ہے۔ لہذا آج بھی دیکھیں کہ چائنا کے اندر جتنی بھی ورکشاپ ہوتی ہیں، جتنی بھی فیکٹریز ہوتی ہیں، آج کل انہوں نے بیڈ لگائے ہوئے ہوتے ہیں کہ درمیان میں کام کرنے کے بعد ہر ایمپلائی جو ہے وہ تھوڑی دیر آرام کر لے تاکہ بعد کا جو وقت ہے وہ آسانی کے ساتھ گزرے۔ رسول اللہ صلی اللہ علیہ وآلہ وسلم کا یہ معمول ہوتا کہ آقا علیہ السلام دوپہر کے کھانے کے بعد تھوڑی دیر کے لیے صحیح آرام فرماتے، اس کو قیلولہ کہتے۔ قیلولہ کرنے کے بعد بندہ ایک مرتبہ پھر فریش ہو جاتا ہے اور اس سے آپ کا ذہن پرسکون رہتا ہے، لہذا اس سنت پر بھی عمل کیا کریں، پرسکون زندگی گزاریں، غصہ وغیرہ سے پرہیز کریں کہ غصہ کرنے کی وجہ سے انسان کے دماغ پر اس کا بہت زیادہ اثر پڑتا ہے۔ قرآن مجید نے اس کے بارے میں فرمایا والقاظمین الغیظ والعافین عن الناس واللہ یحب المحسنین، غصے کو پی جانے والا، لوگوں کو معاف کرنے والا اللہ تبارک و تعالیٰ کو بہت پسند ہے، لہذا اس پر عمل کیا کریں۔ اپنی ذات کے حوالے سے سوچا کریں کہ قرآن مجید نے ہمیں اپنی ذات کو سنوارنے کے لیے پہلے حکم دیا ہے، جس کو سیلف لو کہیں گے، اپنی ذات سے محبت کریں۔ سیلفش ہونا الگ چیز ہے، سیلف لو الگ چیز ہے، اپنے آپ کو پسند کرو، اپنے آپ کے اندر آپ سوچیں، اسی لیے اپنے آپ کو خوش کرنے والے کام کیا کریں، آپ دوسروں کی فکر کم کیا کریں، آپ اپنی زیادہ فکر کریں۔ اسی لیے آپ دیکھیں کہ رسول اللہ صلی اللہ علیہ وآلہ وسلم نے ارشاد فرمایا تم میں سے بے شمار لوگ ایسے ہوں گے جو دوسروں کے اچھا کرنے میں اپنی آخرت کو خراب کر دیں گے۔ آج یہاں پر یہی ہو رہا کہ ہم اپنے بال بچوں کے فیوچر کے لیے اپنی آخرت کو خراب کرنے کی کوشش کر رہے ہیں، کیا اوور ٹائم جاب کر رہے ہیں، حلال حرام کی تمیز نہیں کرنی چاہیے۔ قرآن مجید کی سورۃ التحریم میں فرمایا گیا یا اپنے آپ کو، سب سے پہلے فرمایا انفسکم तुम अपने आप को और चाहिए, अपना ख्याल रखना चाहिए। और अल्लाह तबारक व तआला ने इन शकरतुम लअज़ीदन्नकुम, तुम मेरा शुक्र अदा करोगे मैं तुम्हें और ज्यादा दूंगा। और फिर सदका तो खैरात किया करें, उससे इंशाअल्लाह आपको ज़हनी सुकून मिलेगा। फिर हालात के एतबार से मुस्कुराते भी रहना चाहिए। रसूलुल्लाह सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने फरमाया मुस्कुराना भी एक सदका है। बंदा जब स्माइल करता है तो उस स्माइल की वजह से उसका ब्रेन फ्रेश हो जाता है और उसको जहनी सुकून मिला करता है। और जो जहनी सुकून में होगा वो कभी भी मेंटल हेल्थ के इश्यू का शिकार नहीं होगा। फिर आखिरी एक सुन्नत बता करके हम अपनी गुफ्तगू को ख़त्म करते हैं कि सिगरेट और नशा आवर जो चीज़ें हैं उससे परहेज़ किया करें और खुशबू लगाया करें। रसूलुल्लाह सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम को दुनियावी चीज़ों में से जो पसंदीदा चीज़ें हैं उनमें एक फरमाया गया खुशबू, यानी आप जो है वो इत्र लगाएं या जो विदाउट अल्कोहल स्प्रे होते हैं वो लगाएं या आपके घर को खुशबूदार रखें। ये खुशबू की वजह से ये जो एक स्मेल होती है उस स्मेल से आपके दिमाग पर असर पड़ता है और आपका दिमाग इस खुशबू की वजह से फ्रेश हो जाएगा। लिहाजा इन चीज़ों को अगर आप तिब्बे नबवी और सुन्नत मुस्तफ़ी की रोशनी में अमल करेंगे तो इंशाअल्लाह आपको एक सुन्नत पर अमल करने की वजह से 100 शहीदों का सवाब भी मिलेगा और रसूलुल्लाह सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की सुन्नत की बरकत से आप इंशाअल्लाह मेंटल हेल्थ ये ज़हनी बीमारियां हैं उससे भी आप इंशाअल्लाह महफूज रहेंगे। अल्लाह तबारक व तआला हम तमाम को हर तरह की बीमारी से बिलखुसूस मेंटल हेल्थ जो इस सोसाइटी का उभरता हुआ इश्यू है, अल्लाह तबारक व तआला हर मुसलमान को हर इंसान को इस मर्ज से महफूज फरमाए। वमा अलैना इल्लल बलागुल मुबीन। अब मैं माइक हमारे मोहतरम मकाम जनाब डॉक्टर मोहम्मद सलीम खान साहब के हवाले करूँगा, जो हमारी मस्जिद के चेयरमैन होने के साथ साथ इन्होंने PhD भी किया है और वो अपने शोबे के लिए दूर दूर आउट ऑफ कंट्रीज बेशुमार ममालिक में ये कॉन्फ्रेंस में जाते हैं और वहाँ पर ये स्पीच डिलीवर करते हैं और उनकी मालूमात से जब दुनिया फ़ायदा उठाती है तो जाहिर सी बात है ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए कि चराग के तले अंधेरा हो। हमारे सामने हमारे साथ में जब इस तरह के पढ़े लिखे लोग मौजूद हों तो हमें उनके नॉलेज से, उनकी तालीम और उनकी मालूमात से और उनका जो एक्सपीरियंस है उससे हमें फ़ायदा हासिल करना चाहिए। इसलिए मैं हमेशा कहता हूँ कि हमारी कम्युनिटी में जितने भी लोग जिस मैदान में हैं, जिस मामले में हैं, अगर बैरिस्टर हैं, सॉलिसिटर हैं या इस मामले में जो डॉक्टर्स हैं या अकाउंटेंट्स हैं, जो इस तरह के मामलात में महारत रखते हैं, उन्हें चाहिए कि वो अपनी कौम को अपने इल्म से फ़ायदा पहुँचाएं। कि अगर आप अपने इल्म से उनको फ़ायदा पहुँचाएंगे तो यकीनन ये भी एक सदका जारिया है। मैं बिला किसी ताक़ीद के अपने मोहतरम मेहमान जनाब डॉक्टर मोहम्मद सलीम खान साहब से गुजारिश करूँगा कि वो इस टॉपिक पर अपनी मालूमात को फराहम करें। फिर इंशाअल्लाह डॉक्टर अब्दुल रऊफ साहब आगे इस बात को बढ़ाएंगे। जज़ाकुमुल्लाह।
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम वला नबलुवन्नकुम बिशैइन मिनल खौफि वल जू'i व नक़्सिन मिनल अमवालि वल अनफुसि वस्समरात व बश्शिरिस साबिरीन। सुभान रब्बि इश्रह ली सदरी व यस्सिर ली अमरी वहलुल उक़दतम मिन लिसानी यफ़क़हू क़ौली। अस्सलातु वस्सलामु अलैका सय्यदी या रसूलल्लाह व अला आलिका व अस्हाबिका सय्यदी या हबीबल्लाह। जा ज़िंदगी मदीने से जोंके हवा के ला, शायद हुजूर हमसे खफा है मना के ला। कुछ हम भी अपना चेहरा बातिन संवार लें, अबू बकर से कुछ आईने इश्क़ व वफ़ा के ला। दुनिया बहुत ही तंग मुसलमान पे हो गई, फारूक के आज़म के ज़माने से कुछ नक्शे उठा के ला। महरूम कर दिया हमें जिनसे निगाह से, उस उस्मान से हो ज़ाविये शर्म व हया के ला। मगरिब में मारा मारा ना फिर ए गदाइल दरवाज़ा अली से ये हैरात जाके ला बातिल से दब रही है फिर उम्मत रसूल की मंजिल जरा हुसैन से कुछ करबला के ला respected ulama ikram mufti sahab my respected elders brothers assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh what we've been given is the topic of mental illness and an Islamic perspective. Both myself and my respected brother Dr. Rauf were talking earlier, mental health illness isn't our sort of main priority in our day-to-day work, but obviously it's a need of our time, and it's an illness which is almost being swept under the carpet. And what we want to actually try and do is, there's 2 or 3 things we want to get out of this, and inshallah, I understand it's late at night, so first of all, I'd like to thank you all for sitting. Inshallah, what we'll do is, we'll take an Islamic perspective. Mufti Sahib has done it very, very eloquently. What I'll try and do is, in my small way, just as a student of Islam, just do that, then go into the history of mental illness. This isn't a new phenomenon. Then we'll look into the different types of mental illness. And then we'll look at also the social side of it, because a lot of the mental illness is now self-inflicted. So, the likes of drug abuse, I'll cover that as well. And at the end, what we'll do is, as always, finish with a solution from the teachings of our blessed Nabi, inshallah. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if I can get onto the first slide. So just looking at the history, starting with our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this actual sorrowful time or emotional time isn't new. Our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam explains that year, or the Sahaba explain it as, it's called Amul Huzn, the year of sorrow. And as it's mentioned there, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam lost their beloved wife, Sayyidina Khadijatul Kubra, radiyallahu ta'ala anha. They also lost their uncle Abu Talib. Bear in mind, these were the pillars for Huzur Pak. When they announced in public their nubuwwah, these were the people that were their protectors. At the same time, there was an economic boycott against the Prophet and the Sahaba, and there was persecution of all of these people. So if you imagine our blessed Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam losing the closest people to themselves, and also having to go through this economic boycott and persecution of the small amount of Muslims at the time. So a very, very difficult year. So when we talk about the difficulties that we have or we face, let's just see and focus on how our Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam dealt with the weaknesses or dealt with any of these difficulties. And the next one, obviously there are so many examples. The next one I'd like to just cover quite quickly, and again, for everyone, this is an emotive subject. It is on the death of, so we go on to the next slide, onto the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's son Ibrahim. Again, there's Abdul Rahman ibn Auf asked, Ya Rasulullah, why are there tears in your eyes? And our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam explained that this is the mercy that Allah has bestowed upon me. And the actual dua that our Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam read at that time, Innal ayna tadma wal qalbi yahzan wa la taqulu illa man yarda rabbana. So what our Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam stated was, the eyes are shedding tears and the heart is grieved, and we will not say except what pleases our Lord. So whilst such a big trauma in front of our Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, it was still, what they said is that this is from our Allah, so we will accept it. Whatever pleases Allah will be accepted. Now, just coming on to some of the earlier research, as you've just seen on there, the scholars, the Muslim scholars early on, this isn't a new phenomenon. When we talk about depression, we don't talk about stress, we talk about schizophrenia. None of these are new. These were studied, and I'll come up through a bit of the history. So, ilm nafsiyat, study of the nafs, self-psyche. You know, there's various different areas and topics around that. The qalb is one of them, the heart. And you know, you see a lot of our people, when they do zikr, they specifically do qalbi zikrs, just to show that, you know, your heart has to have, you know, Allah bin zikrillahi tatma'innal qulub. Then the ruh, the spirit, the aql, the intellect, and mental health and well-being is the fourth. And what I'll try and do is just go through quickly, you know, all the scientists, Muslim scientists that have worked on this, and put timelines on them as well. So 854 CE to 925 CE, Al-Razi. Now, just to give you an idea, you know, just with the numbers, some of you may be aware, our blessed Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam was born in 570 CE. So if you imagine, what, 300 years later, the first director of a psychiatric board in the world was located in Baghdad Sharif in Iraq. 2 books, Al-Mansuri and Al-Hawi, mention complaints, signs, differential diagnosis, and effective treatment of illness. So mental illness was covered at that time. And again, treatment at that time was with psychotherapy and with drugs. Now we move on a bit further. Another of our Muslim scholars and scientists, Al-Balkhi, again, he wrote a book that discussed the psychosomatic diseases with the emphasis on soul and body. There has to be a combination of both soul and body for, you know, for us to function, and that was it. And if the nafs gets sick, the body may also have no joy in life with development of physical illnesses. I'll come on to the research around this just slightly later on. And then again, Avicenna or Ibn Sina, who's probably one of the more famous scientists within the Muslims. And as you can see, even at that time, we're looking at 980 to 1037 CE. So 500 years after our blessed Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, these guys were actually mapping out the brain and all the different portions of the brain and what each part of the brain controlled. And again, they wrote books, and just if you look at the treatments for insomnia, mania, epilepsy, depression, that was all discussed in that time. And then, you know, returning back to the Quran, and you know, the Quran itself states, "Fas'alu ahla dhikri in kuntum la ta'lamun." Ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. And this translates in so many ways. And a lot of our people sitting here, our congregation, I often see them asking questions of Mufti Sahib just to get answers to, you know, topics that they're interested in. And this is specifically not just this. I guess doesn't apply just in this instance. It's for everything. We've got, as Mufti Sahib mentioned, we've got lawyers sitting here. We've got accountants sitting here. So, you know, whatever field it is, you know, we have to ask the question. I mean, I believe there's taxi drivers sitting here. In many places, we don't know the direction, so we have to ask the people that know. So this applies to all, and I'm sure Mufti Sahib will allude on that, inshallah. So, you know, the types of mental illness, and this is of interest, I guess. The only thing was, you know, when I did my research on this, it covers quite a lot of areas. And because of time constraints, I don't want to actually go into too much details, but I'll give you an overview. So in terms of biological, there's 2 types. There's hormonal and neurotransmitter deficiency. So if we just take on the hormonal aspects of it, you know, it's anxiety and depression come under that. You know, there's postpartum depression. So, you know, after pregnancy, women sometimes suffer this depression. There's menopause-associated psychosis. So these are just examples of some of the biological. You know, for the youngsters, I think some of you may be studying, you know, your GCSEs exams or whatever it is, or A-levels. There is a lot more data that, you know, this isn't probably the time or the place for that. And then, you know, in terms of, you know, the hormones involved in mental health, that's, you know, the obvious ones: estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, serotonin. Those are the normal hormones that are actually involved. The next one is, when you have neurotransmitter deficiency, again, this is, both of these are actually treated by pharmaceutical drugs. And I'll come on to the point that, one of the things within our own community is that mental health is almost seen as almost type 2 diabetes, where a lot of us may have type 2 diabetes and just live our daily life without actually knowing about it. Similarly, with mental health, what we tend to find is it's a bit of a taboo subject. If those that have family members that suffer from mental health know the pressures and everything associated with it. But the common person, if you come across, I'm sorry to say this, we find it quite funny that somebody behaves in the way that they do without realizing the background, what they're actually going through. So that's the neurotransmitter deficiency. Again, under that comes mood swings, mood disorders. You'll get schizophrenia is another one, anxiety, addiction is another one. The neurotransmitters, the ones that we all know about are the likes of serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and GABA. Those are the sort of main ones. And then genetic, there is also the genetic aspect where there's a family history of, say for example, this schizophrenia or any other, depression is probably the most important one that we see on a regular basis, and that actually just shows up, with in a family history. You can track it back, similar to cardiovascular disease. All of that's actually tracked back. If we move on to the next slide. So the next ones are probably a bit more personal to all of us. Environmental. So the first thing is personal trauma. If we've all had loved ones that have passed away, that have left this dunya, we all deal with it in a different way. Some people are a bit more composed, others need to cry, others need to go away, sit themselves down and do that. And then the other thing is accident. When you have a trauma, a major trauma is associated with personal, because a lot of people, when they have like accident of some description, you've spoken to people, they'll come back and they'll talk about how they have flashbacks, they have nightmares, all of that. And again, for that they actually need treatment. The next one, the war, the example of Gaza. I mean, look, you've all seen what the terrorist state of Israel is actually doing to the Muslims. As the Muslim world sleeps, these people are being impacted. And look, let's forget the adults. A lot of them realize, this is the time to claim Shahadat, and that's what they're doing. What they're saying is, the research that's coming out of there is saying that in excess of 95% of those children. So if you imagine, the easiest way to explain it to you is bonfire night. If you've got youngsters in the middle of the night, some of these fireworks go off. A child suddenly wakes up, a child cries. You then put them back to sleep. This is the short trauma that they feel. Now imagine that on a scale of 10,000 times when they're throwing 2,000-pound bombs onto these people, and it's not once, it's not twice, repetitively, because they know they can. Their hands aren't tied. So these kids, what they're saying is that these kids that are in Gaza now, as they grow up, the trauma will stay with them. And that's where, as Mufti Saab alluded to earlier, Islam actually comes in, and we'll cover some of those bits as we go along. And then suffering, the likes of famine and, the others, disasters, you will actually get that. So again, these are where mental health illnesses are impacted. And then, the spiritual side of things, loss of faith. There's two ways of looking at this. Loss of faith is, you see a lot of brothers down the straight path, and they're reading namaz, they're doing everything. Suddenly they go off the track and they kind of want to do their own thing in their own time. And masjid or namaz and anything doesn't become a priority. That again causes, mental stress. And the other one, which is, again, some of you may have seen is, when these Muslims or ex-Muslims, when they leave the faith of Islam, ironically, if you go onto any of the, YouTube anywhere and you see these Muslims, they are infatuated and they're fascinated by Islam. They've left the fold of Islam, yet they want to actually talk about Islam. And these guys, again, have this mental disorder as well. And the final one, faith-based. Faith-based, again, we are the believers of the wali of Allah. We have no issue with that. But the reliance these days on, I'm sorry to say this, the fake peers as they describe them, these people cause a lot more damage to the mental health of individuals because first, they don't have the understanding as the alims do. So they just distort the religion and kind of, when somebody, just imagine you in a very, very precarious position, somebody of your family is really ill, and you've tried everything, and these guys say, they can actually make a difference. Human nature says we head towards these people, but again, they cause a lot of strife. So if we move on to the next one. So these are some of the slides just showing that, what the World Health Organization is saying. Half of the world's population has some sort of mental illness. It's at various different levels, right from, where they need pharmaceutical treatment to the very, very basic. If you take the kids, for example, those that are sitting GCSEs and A-levels, in a few months or in the next month, they'll say, oh yes, we're stressed. What kind of stress is that? Look, if you compare the same stress of a child sitting a GCSE exam to the stress of the children of Gaza, it's like at two different levels, but still they call it stress. The exams are over, then the stress goes. And what the World Health Organization and all the other organizations say is that good mental health can enhance one's life. So we'll come on to look at some of these earlier. The thing is, it allows you to live a normal life. And then, if you are in good mental health, as the slide itself says, you can realize your own abilities, you can deal with the normal stresses of days, can work productively, able to make a contribution to society. But not everyone's in that position. If you look at those with mental illness, the way that the illness affects them, they think differently, they feel differently, they behave differently, and you'll come across people like that. Even sitting in a small group, they find it very difficult to sit amongst people. So, the ayah that I started with, and there was a purpose to that. The Quran says, وَلَا نَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَالنَّقْصِ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. And we surely will test you with something of fear and hunger and loss of wealth and lives and fruits, but good tidings to the patient. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying this to us, that we're going to test you with all of this. This is the most merciful, the most kind. He's telling you that these tests will come towards you. And then, if we take this hadith of Sayyid Bukhari, which says, "Man yuridillah bihi hayran yusibhu minhu." If Allah intends good for someone, then He afflicts upon him trials. So tests. So the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is also saying this. The Quran has said it. The hadith of the Zul Pak is also saying that if Allah wants good for somebody, they'll afflict them with trials. But then, if we move slightly on the same surah of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, "La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha." Allah will not burden a soul more than he can bear. So the idea is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, look, we will go through tests. We all have been through tests. Everyone goes through tests. Whether it's, for the students, it's your GCSEs, your A-levels, whatever it is, your 11 plus, you move on, those that are in work, everyone talks about work pressures, the hours we're going to do in work. Those that are, in any other, profession, they'll say, look, we can't make ends meet, this cost of living crisis or whatever it is, we have to work longer. Then if you look at the elders, when they're afflicted with, various different conditions, they're going to go into hospital, they'll go in with one condition and get diagnosed with another. And all of these come through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As it says, Allah won't burden any soul more than they can bear. And then, if we move on to the next one, this is a hadith of seeking treatment. And the purpose I put this hadith up simply is, if you look at the translations, seek treatment, so servants of Allah. For verily Allah has not sent down a disease without also sending down a cure. What we tend to do, and I've seen this even in the most difficult of cases. When somebody, if two examples I'll give you. One is, cardiovascular disease. Somebody's about to have a heart attack, or they're close to having a heart attack, and Dr. Saab will allude to this as well. You have the signs and symptoms for it. A lot of we see this. A lot of the other communities will go straight to the hospital, get into the cath labs, and get observations done. We leave it till the very, very last moment, and when somebody suddenly collapses, then we decide, now's the time to take them in. And sometimes that doesn't work in our favor. And this hadith just encourages that Muslims should actively seek treatment. And for us, I think in any, whether it's mental health or anything else, we should do it, and it should be. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says that we also provide a cure for every illness. So when we are afflicted by things, and look, this is, they are like various different, you've got the basic illnesses to, terminal cancers. This hadith applies to absolutely everything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, look, there's a cure. Obviously, there isn't a cure for death. Every soul will taste death. But the point of this is that there is a place for treatment, and then, seeking professional help. The hadith also covers that, like, go and seek professional help in any of these, whether it's counseling, in the case of mental health, or, if you need pharmaceutical or whatever treatments, just go ahead and do that. And, with good health, I'll run through this. I know I'm taking quite a lot of time. The criteria of, individuals with good mental health, they generally have emotional balance, social adjustment. They can adjust in very different. Their perception actually matches, perceive things the way that they are, rather than kind of. And you've come to, on the other slide, you'll see what I mean. And their achievements are generally consistent with their individuals' abilities and opportunities. And then risk factors for mental disorders. This just gives you a ratio. It basically breaks down, if you take autism, depression, ADHD, how, the ratios between men and women and how they suffer. Again, it just varies, from country to country and, place to place. Opiate addiction, and so we'll move on quickly onto the drugs. And the only reason I'm doing this is that we are all aware that, in our own areas and far beyond, in our Muslim community, a lot of people are using drugs. And, if you take some of these opiates, what it does lead to is anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, there's alcoholism in there, bipolar disorder. So there's various different conditions there. If we move on to the next one, and if we move on to the next slide, just for the interest of time. So we just take schizophrenia, for example. People that suffer from this, again, this is, after years of drug abuse, sometimes poor memory, crying without a reason, laughing without reason. They have aggressive behavior, speech disorders, lack of motivation, and visual hallucinations as well. And this is at various different levels. If you again take depression, the signs and symptoms, no concentration. A lot of these people then, it comes back to drug abuse, which I'll come on to, energy loss, helplessness, and again, the way this impacts everyone is, first of all, the individuals themselves. It's a big thing. We shouldn't take this lightly, because it does actually impact the person. Even getting up is very, very difficult for them. Then moving on, the family, it impacts the family, because they have to look after the individuals, make sure that they're taking their drugs on time and all the rest of it, And then the community at large is, impacted as well. In the sense, if you've got someone schizophrenic, and look, we've seen it on TV, that somebody just goes around with a knife just because they're hallucinating, and they suddenly kill a group of people. And when they go into court, they can't recollect what they've actually done. So this is how serious this actually is. And then in terms of, there's a stigma, as I mentioned, it's attached to it. With individuals, it's the symptoms are distressing, unable to work or, participate. In a gathering like this, somebody with those symptoms wouldn't be able to sit here. They find it difficult within a group. With a family, there's economic burden. If you've got to look after a loved one, that's a burden on yourselves. The routine is lost in the household. And there's a loss for work and social opportunities, and for the community, the care costs, loss of productivity, and as I mentioned, there's legal problems, including violence, within this group. If we go on to the next slide. So I think the main thing what they're looking at is, primary prevention is raising public awareness. This is just like a small group that we're just discussing between ourselves. But what they do is they do conferences for all of this. Then they also look at life skills, teach people, how to actually go about living their life or a certain routine to it. Then if you go to the secondary, again, screening, early diagnosis, if you see a psychiatrist, you get all of the treatments, and then you fight. But again, as I say, there's some of these that we can't help. The people of Gaza, the people of Syria, they don't have this healthcare system. They won't be able to do any of these. So that's that. If we move on to the tertiary, again, it impacts self-esteem and confidence of these people. And even in a group which is, disabled, you have a similar thing. Because if, for example, our masjid now, if somebody wants to come in with a wheelchair, if there isn't that opportunity for them to sit down and participate, it just makes it very, very difficult. And that's why they talk about inclusivity. Now coming on to substance abuse, which is, I'll quickly run through this. There's two sides of this. It's, with addiction, there's obviously alcohol, drugs, whatever that is, even tobacco addiction. And then there's other behaviors, gambling, excess eating. Some people are sort of so, online all the time, they kind of, that becomes their life. If you, even, just by observations, and again, please forgive me if I'm not finger pointing at anyone. Some people after 4 o'clock, they need to check their phones to see what's going on. That kind of thing where you feel that, you're missing out even in, when you're kind of in that position. So if we move on to the next slide, substances abuse, drugs abuse. So these are controlled substances that are used normally within medical reasons. But what happens is people get used to them, they need higher volume, higher doses, and then they are prone to drug abuse or drug dependence, which is the second one. Then if you look at psychoactive drugs, that control the CNS for calming, energizing, or pleasurable, a lot of these people then take these prescription drugs and just use them in their private, amongst friends. And then addicted people, they don't are unable to free themselves. They need help of family, but those that have relatives or loved ones that have addictions, only they know how difficult all of this is. It's not so easy. Alcohol dependence, I put this up, only the reason I put this up is because, let's be fair, our community have a few people that enjoy a pint, as it were, and forgive me again for saying this, again, I'm not finger pointing, but we all know that this happens. And again, the point is, where they start from to where they end, it's disaster. Alcohol, as Mufti Sahib has mentioned so many times, the reason or the rationale why it was kind of forbidden is exactly that. You start from very small doses, so just like drugs, from very, very small, to the point where, you can't cut back, and you see people that they're lying on the floor. And again, our brothers probably, our brothers that are taxi drivers who actually work in the evenings, again, when I speak to them, they do mention that, these guys are like, they're completely out of it. And it's a cultural thing for them, and it's quite acceptable within them. But as Muslims, for us, we need to refrain from it. And for the youngsters, this applies to both drugs as well as alcohol. So if, on the next one, I'm not going to labor too much on this because, look, this isn't a science lesson. We know all the psychoactive drugs, narcotics, which include morphine, heroin, and codeine, the stimulants, amphetamines and cocaine, depressants, alcohol, barbiturates, hallucinogens, LSD and mescaline, and then cannabis. So, all of these, a lot of the youngsters don't know of these because, on our streets, all you got to do is pick up a phone. It's like a delivery service. I don't want to say this, but you can actually get it delivered to your home address. But the point is, this is impacting our whole community, our society, just so some people can kind of make a living from it. But again, if we take this it just, for anyone that's interested, if they've got constricted pupils, then these are the drugs they're taking. Red eyes is generally marijuana, cocaine. Dilated pupils gives you amphetamines, methamphetamines, cocaine, marijuana, speed. So you just, if you look at somebody and they're dazed, if they've got nothing else wrong with them, on their eyes, these are just examples. And then the risk factors of addiction, I thought this is worth mentioning again. It's whether it's pharmaceutical drugs, which a doctor will prescribe to you, can be highly addictive. And the availability, and as I mentioned, it's fairly easy to get drugs. The rate for, in terms of gender, women are more likely, for example, 3 times more likely to be alcoholics than men, according to this research. There are other research as well. Psychic and neurological illnesses. There's a family history of addiction. Normally, those people that have 1 or 2 parents that are drug addicts, the child, even when they're at birth and beyond, they have a dependence, almost a dependence on drugs. Some of the things that actually impact us, lack of family involvement. If we look out for each other, look after our family, it's fairly important. We can keep people away from all of this. Anxiety, depression, and loneliness, and the peer pressure. And then impacts of drug abuse. You have HIV, you have accidents, unconscious coma and sudden death, crime and violence, financial problems, poor motivation for school kids, and family problems. On that happy note, what I'll do is, because it's a fairly long presentation, I could actually go on, and I know that this is sleep time for most people. So I'll stop there. I'll hand over to Dr. Saab, who will just quickly give you some statistical facts, and then inshallah, any questions, and then we'll move on. And
Assalamu alaikum. Once again, nice to see a great turnout, and I'm sure a lot of people at home listening as well. So, a wonderful topic, and I think a lot has already been said, and I think a lot's been covered, and I don't think anything more needs to be said about the prevalence of this disease in our community and other adjoining communities. But I think I just want to point out that how do we fare in the treatment of these illnesses? So this is a fact sheet which has been compiled by the Wolf Institute. So that's WOOLF Wolf Institute. That's a Cambridge University established organization. And out of the 46,000 Muslims referred to NHS talking therapy, so that's a therapy for anxiety, depression that people get referred to. In the year 2021 and 2022, only 2.6%. So that's only, if my maths is right, about nearly 1,500 Muslims out of 46,000 completed therapy. So that's a really low number. So compared to Christians, our fellow Christians, who in fact 18.4%, so there's a big difference there. And those of no religion, they in fact hit 39% nearly. So we don't complete the treatment. So what's the reason? I'll leave you guys to think about that, and perhaps maybe we can talk about that. 1 in 3 Muslims who experience a mental health problem get access to support. So we don't know why that is. Maybe it's due to stigma. That means maybe people are scared that what the family says about their diagnosis, the impact on the family progression, discrimination, or lack of any faith-sensitive support. But nearly half, well, in fact, another survey from Muslim youth on a helpline of over 1,000 British Muslims aged 16 to 30 found that only 13%, 1/3, of the respondents actually saw a counsellor, so another low number. A half said they would turn to their friends. That's interesting. and nearly 1/3 said they would get help from the family. So we're not actually thinking straight ahead again. So I'm really worried about how we get treatment and what our thoughts are about treatment. It's very important to get treatment because one who lives in depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, I think my brother Slim has already said that there is a clear link with cardiovascular disease, that means disease of the heart or stroke. So if somebody has depression, they have a more propensity to have a heart attack or a stroke. So it's best to get treatment early. And of course, the quality of life is so low. People live a life of maybe suffering, you could say, in silence. And unfortunately, our community, we don't recognize this as an illness. And it's a great shame. I think this talk today is aimed at trying to create awareness more than anything else, and for people to get help from the organizations that are available. We should seek, I think, a reply from our non-Muslim colleagues, like I already mentioned, Christians, even people with no religion, they complete therapies more than we do. Why is that? I mean, is there no belief that this exists? Maybe there is, I don't know. So, really, I don't think I have more to say, really. I mean, I think Dr. Sidhu has said quite a lot, and I think a lot's been said, and I hope that people have learned or, in fact, gained some knowledge on mental health and its problems within our society. I mean, the slides speak for themselves. It's crime, illness, family problems. There's just too many to note. The treatment itself, some of the medication, I sort of brought out, is in fact also quite tricky sometimes, because some of the treatments aimed at schizophrenia, that in fact can cause certain cardiac death as well. So people who are on treatment for schizophrenia, they must actually check that their treatments don't interfere with their heart rhythms, because I think we have a doctor in the audience, Dr. Shopi, who will know this, that some of these drugs can increase the heart intervals, and these can lead to sudden death. So people on treatment, please remember that, and just, you can make a Google search, have a look, perhaps not Google, but do a search and have a look, and perhaps ask your GP. And I think I'll leave it there. If there are any questions anybody has, we're happy to answer them.
किसी को कोई सवाल करना है तो कर सकते हैं। किसी को कोई सवाल करना है?
I'll just add one thing.
Do you want to, obviously, a doctor, if you come and
you
speak on, just speak, that might be good for.
Thank you. Because I work in a GP practice, and I know in daily practice, anxiety, depression could be common in our society because of the socio-economical status. People could be worried about their, daily living and stuff. As we're talking about the dementia, I think that first of all, our community people, they might not reach to the age where the dementia is common in the population, like in 80 or 90 years age people, they might normally have dementia. But the question which I will raise in awareness, there might be in the society, our public might have a vascular dementia, your cardiorespiratory, because the people might have hypertension and they don't care about it. Even if the people are on the medication, they don't normally take it, and their blood pressure stays high, and they get a stroke, and then they get the dementia. So the basic, I think, the root cause is the blood pressure. So if the people take up their, the health, the hypertension, and they take the medication regularly, or do the exercise, I hope they will not reach to the stage where they can have these, problem for the long term. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه وذرياته وأهل بيته أجمعين. یا اللہ یا رحمان یا رحیم، رات کے اس پہر میں ہم سب کا تیرے پاکیزہ گھر میں بیٹھنا اور اس علمی مجلس میں علم حاصل کرنا اپنی بارگاہ میں قبول منظور فرما. کوئی غلطی کوتاہی ہو چکی ہو سب کو اپنے فضل و کرم سے معاف فرما. یا اللہ عالم اسلام کے مسلمانوں کی جان مال عزت آبرو کی حفاظت فرما. بالخصوص فلسطین اور کشمیر کو مکمل آزادی عطا فرما. یا اللہ ہر مسلمان کو ہر طرح کی بیماری سے محفوظ فرما، اور جو کسی بھی بیماری میں مبتلا ہیں یا اللہ ان تمام مریضوں کو شفائے کاملہ عاجلہ عطا فرما. یا اللہ ہم تمام کو قرآن مجید کا نور عطا فرما. رسول اللہ صلی اللہ علیہ وآلہ وسلم کی سنتوں پر عمل کرنے کی توفیق عطا فرما. سنت مصطفیٰ پر عمل کر کے ہمیں اپنی تمام بیماریوں کا علاج کرنے کی توفیق عطا فرما. یا اللہ تیری ذات ہی حقیقی شفا دینے والی ہے، یہ سب اسباب ہیں. یا اللہ ہمیں اپنی رضا نصیب فرما. یا اللہ تو ہم سے راضی ہو جا اور اپنے پیارے حبیب علیہ السلام کو ہم سے راضی فرما دے. ہمیشہ اپنی رضا والے کام کرنے کی توفیق عطا فرما. اپنی ناراضگی سے ہمیں بچا. یا اللہ نیک اعمال کی توفیق عطا فرما. بد اعمالیوں سے ہماری حفاظت فرما. جتنے بھی احباب یہاں پر جمع ہیں اور سوشل میڈیا کے ذریعے ریڈیو کے ذریعے سن رہے ہیں، دعاؤں پر آمین آمین پکار رہے ہیں، یا اللہ سب کی دعائیں اپنی بارگاہ میں مستجاب فرما. ہمارے پینل میں تشریف فرما. ان ڈاکٹر حضرات کو جزائے خیر عطا فرما. یا اللہ کمیونٹی میں جتنے بھی اس طرح کے پڑھے لکھے لوگ ہیں انہیں اپنی کمیونٹی کو اپنے علم سے فیض پہنچانے کی توفیق عطا فرما. اس مسجد کو آباد فرما. جو مساجد و مدارس کو آباد کرتے ہیں یا اللہ تو ان کی دنیا اور ان کی آخرت کو آباد فرما. ہماری دعائیں اپنی بارگاہ میں ماہ رمضان مبارک کی ان بابرکت ساعتوں کے سب کو فیض قبول و منظور فرما. صلی اللہ تعالی علی النبی الکریم وعلی آلہ واصحابہ اجمعین برحمتک یا ارحم الراحمین.